We often go about our days overwhelmed by the weight of life's worries, never pausing to consider the simple, profound gift of prayer. In a world of constant noise and distraction, the quiet of a moment spent in prayer seems like a rare treasure, hidden, secret, almost inaccessible. Yet it is in this very secret place that God calls us to meet Him, far from the eyes of others and the judgment of the world. It is in this quiet space that we find the peace, strength, and direction that our hearts so desperately seek. But how often do we overlook this truth? How often do we forget that the most powerful prayers are not always the loud public proclamations, but those whispered from the heart, in silence, before the Father who sees all in secret? We live in a time where everything must be visible. Social media, our lives, our work, and even our faith seem to demand constant attention and outward expression. Yet the most intimate relationship we can have, our relationship with God, thrives in silence, in the hidden chambers of our hearts. In Matthew 6:6, Jesus teaches us, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father, who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." This call to a secret place of prayer is not a mere suggestion, but an invitation into the depths of divine communion, where our souls can be transformed without the distraction of the world around us.
This prayer is not asking for immediate solutions, but is an act of trust, a declaration that we believe God is in control, even when life feels uncertain. It is a prayer that says, "I am here, not to demand, but to listen, not to question, but to trust." In such moments, we begin to experience the peace that transcends all understanding, a peace that only comes when we let go and allow God to work in our lives. In our busy, often distracted lives, it can be difficult to find this quiet space. But how essential it is! For it is in this hidden time that God shapes and refines us. The outside world may never see our tears or hear our deepest cries, but God, in His mercy and love, sees them all. The question is not whether God is listening, He always is, but whether we are willing to step away from the noise and listen ourselves. As we begin to practice these secret prayers, it is important to remember that it is not the eloquence of our words that moves God, but the sincerity of our hearts. God does not require grand speeches or complicated rituals. He requires honesty, humility, and a willingness to surrender. We may not always feel His presence in the way we expect, but we must trust that in our quietest moments, He is near. And so, I ask you, what would it mean for you to spend just a few moments each day in secret prayer? To close the door, silence the world, and simply be with God. It is a simple practice, but one that can transform your life in ways you cannot yet imagine. It is a practice that requires discipline, but it also brings deep, lasting peace. As you reflect on these words, I encourage you to take a step towards this secret place of prayer. Begin with a simple prayer of surrender, trusting that in your quiet moments, God will meet you. And if you find that the world calls you back with its distractions, remember that the door is always open and the Father is always waiting. This secret prayer is the key to a deeper, more meaningful relationship with God, a relationship that will bear fruit in your life and bring peace to your soul. If you find this teaching helpful, I invite you to subscribe and continue exploring the depths of prayer and spiritual practice. May your soul find rest in the quiet moments of secret prayer. In the quiet solitude of prayer, we learn to surrender ourselves completely. The act of surrender is not a mere formality. It is the very foundation of the spiritual life. When we surrender, we let go of our pride, our fears, and even our desires. We trust that God knows what is best for us, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. This trust is not easy to come by, especially in a world that tells us to control everything around us. Yet it is precisely in the act of letting go that we come to know the power of God in a deeper way. Saint Teresa of Avila, one of the most revered mystics of the Church, understood the profound depth of surrender in prayer.
She was a woman who sought God not in grand displays of religious rituals, but in the quiet of her heart. Her life is a testimony to the power of secret prayer, where the soul, unencumbered by the noise of the world, can hear the gentle whispers of God. In her writings, she spoke often of the importance of surrendering completely to God, allowing Him to lead and guide without resistance. She once said, "Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing. God never changes." This prayer of surrender is not a passive act. It is an act of trust that God will provide and guide, even in times of difficulty and uncertainty. To surrender in prayer is to release our own will and submit to God's will. This act of submission is not a sign of weakness, but of deep spiritual strength. It is the strength to admit that we do not have all the answers and that we need God's guidance in our lives. How often do we try to control everything, only to find ourselves overwhelmed and exhausted? How often do we resist God's will, believing that our way is better? Surrendering in prayer requires us to step aside and allow God to take the lead, trusting that His plan for us is always for our good. Consider this simple prayer of surrender. Lord, I trust in your plan for my life. I release my worries and fears into your hands. I surrender my heart and mind to you, knowing that you will guide me on the path you have set before me. This prayer is not about asking for immediate answers or solutions. It is a prayer that says, I trust you, Lord, even when I do not understand. I trust that you are in control. In this surrender, we open our hearts to receive God's peace, a peace that surpasses all understanding. The Bible also speaks of the power of surrender in prayer. In Proverbs 3, verses 5 through 6, we are reminded, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. These verses highlight the importance of trusting in God's wisdom rather than relying on our own limited understanding. When we surrender, we acknowledge that God's knowledge and perspective are far greater than our own. We allow Him to lead us, even when the road ahead is unclear. As we reflect on the example of saints like Saint Teresa of Avila, we are reminded that the path of surrender is not always easy. It requires patience and perseverance. There will be moments when we are tempted to take control again, when doubts and fears creep in. But it is in these moments that we must return to prayer, to the secret place where we can once again surrender our hearts to God. The secret of this surrender lies not in the absence of struggle, but in the presence of faith. It is in the midst of our struggles that we learn to trust more deeply, to surrender more fully. The act of surrendering in prayer does not remove our challenges, but it changes how we face them.
When we surrender, we are not left alone to deal with our burdens. Instead, we are joined by a loving Father who walks with us, strengthens us, and guides us through every trial. How do you experience the struggle of surrender in your own life? What holds you back from fully trusting in God's plan for you? Perhaps it is fear, doubt, or a desire for control. Whatever it may be, know that the secret of surrender is not in the absence of these feelings, but in offering them to God. In the quiet of prayer, we find the strength to release them and to trust that God will guide us, even when the path seems uncertain. As we learn to surrender in prayer, we also begin to understand the deep connection between surrender and peace. The more we release our anxieties and worries into God's hands, the more we experience His peace. It is a peace that comes from knowing that we do not need to have all the answers, because God holds the future in His hands. This peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of God in the midst of them. It is a peace that allows us to face life's challenges with confidence, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. In this secret place of surrender, we find a deeper intimacy with God. The more we surrender, the more we come to know His heart. And the more we know His heart, the more we can trust Him, even when we cannot see the way forward. This is the paradox of surrender. The more we let go, the more we receive. The more we trust, the more we are filled with God's love and peace. Take a moment to reflect on your own journey of surrender. Are there areas in your life where you are holding on too tightly? Are there fears or doubts that you need to release? Bring them to God in prayer and surrender them into His loving hands. Trust that He will lead you, guide you, and give you the peace that only He can provide. May this practice of surrender in prayer bring you closer to God, and may His peace fill your heart and soul. I encourage you to continue in this sacred practice, knowing that each prayer of surrender brings you one step closer to the heart of God. And if you find yourself struggling, remember that God is patient and loving, ready to meet you in your weakness and carry you through. In the sacred silence of secret prayer, we are invited to lay down our burdens before God. This simple yet profound act holds transformative power. But what does it truly mean to pray in secret, away from the gaze of others? How does this hidden communion with God shape us from within, where no one can see or hear? It is in this space where the external world fades and the soul opens to God's voice, that we begin to experience His depth of love and peace. The act of praying in secret is not about the words we speak, but the posture of our hearts. It is a practice that encourages us to step away from the clamor of life and enter a place of quiet surrender.
In Matthew 6:6, Jesus reminds us, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father, who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." These words are not just instructions for where to pray, but an invitation into a deeper, more intimate relationship with God. In secret prayer, we are not concerned with what others think of us. We are solely focused on offering our hearts to the one who knows us completely. St. John of the Cross, a great mystic and poet, often wrote about the transformative power of secret prayer. He experienced profound spiritual insight during long periods of solitary prayer and meditation. For him, the hidden place of prayer was where God truly shaped and purified the soul. One of his most famous writings, The Dark Night of the Soul, speaks of the soul's journey through periods of spiritual dryness and confusion. During these times, the soul may feel abandoned by God, but it is precisely in this silence that God is drawing us closer to Him, purifying our hearts from distractions and helping us grow in trust. St. John wrote, "In the dark night of the soul, the spirit is like a naked child, free from the distractions and attachments of this world, ready to receive God's deepest revelations." It is in the hidden, dark moments of prayer that God often works in ways we cannot comprehend. When we pray in secret, we are surrendering not only our words, but our very selves, our thoughts, our emotions, our desires, into His loving care. Through this process, the soul is made ready for deeper union with God. This secret place is not without struggle. It is easy to become distracted, to feel that our prayers are ineffective or unheard. Yet the quiet persistence of secret prayer is precisely what cultivates a deep, abiding faith. Consider the prayer of the publican in Luke 18:13. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. In the simplicity of this prayer, the publican knew the power of surrender. He came before God with humility, fully aware of his need for grace. In this moment of secret prayer, away from the crowds and their judgments, he was able to receive God's mercy. God does not look for grand speeches or eloquent prayers. He looks for a heart that is humble and contrite. In our own prayer lives, we are invited to enter into this simplicity. The beauty of secret prayer lies not in its complexity, but in its honesty. It is a prayer that does not seek to impress, but to surrender. When we enter this place of quiet prayer, we allow ourselves to be vulnerable before God. We bring our fears, our regrets, our joys, and our hopes, all of it, into His presence. And in doing so, we open ourselves to the transformation that only God can bring. What is it that holds you back from truly praying in secret?
Perhaps it is the fear of silence, the discomfort of facing your own thoughts. Maybe you feel that your prayers are not enough, that God does not hear you. But in the secret place, it is not the length or eloquence of our prayers that matter. It is the sincerity with which we offer our hearts. A simple prayer such as, Father, I trust in you, or Lord, guide me in this moment, can be just as powerful as any formal prayer. The beauty of secret prayer is that it allows us to listen as much as we speak. In the quiet of the heart, we are more attuned to the whisper of God's voice. As we practice this kind of prayer, we begin to hear God's direction more clearly. It is in the silence that we learn to discern His will for our lives. Just as a musician must quiet the noise around him in order to hear the melody of his instrument, so too must we quiet the noise of our hearts in order to hear God's voice. In secret prayer, we are also invited to pray with gratitude, knowing that God sees us and hears us even when no one else does. In these moments, we are not forgotten or abandoned. We are seen by the Father who loves us deeply. Psalm 34:18 offers comfort. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. In secret prayer, we bring our brokenness, our weariness, and our longing before God, trusting that He will meet us in our need and comfort us with His presence. The practice of secret prayer transforms us, shaping us into people who seek God above all else. It removes the distractions of the world and focuses our hearts on the eternal. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, writes of how the restlessness of the human heart can only find peace in God. He says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." In secret prayer, our restless hearts find rest in the loving embrace of God. As you reflect on the role of secret prayer in your own life, take a moment to ask yourself, how can I make more space for God in the quiet of my day? How can I move beyond the distractions and truly open my heart to Him? It may be as simple as setting aside a few minutes each day to sit in stillness, allowing God to speak into your life. It may mean coming before Him with nothing but a humble heart, trusting that He will meet you where you are. May your secret prayers draw you closer to God, and may you experience the peace that comes from knowing that He sees you, hears you, and loves you beyond measure. Let your heart rest in the quiet assurance that, in the secret place, you are never truly alone. The mystery of prayer lies not only in what we say, but in how we listen.
In the act of closing the door to the world, we open the door to a conversation that transcends our earthly understanding. It is not just the words we utter in prayer that matter. It is the deep listening that occurs in our hearts as we wait for God to speak.
This kind of prayer, where both speaking and listening occur in silence, transforms the soul. It is in this hidden place, away from the eyes of others, that we experience God's presence in its purest form. Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, speaks to us about the power of secret prayer. He says in Matthew 6:7-8, "And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." These words remind us that prayer is not about the quantity of our words, but about the quality of our hearts. God already knows our needs, and yet he invites us to speak to him. Why? Because in speaking, we open our hearts to him, and in listening, we open ourselves to the transformation he wants to bring about in our lives. Saint Therese of Lisieux, often called the Little Flower, understood the beauty of this hidden prayer. She lived a life of simplicity and humility, choosing not to be a great preacher or public figure, but to quietly offer her prayers and sacrifices to God in the hidden life of the convent. She is famous for her little way of spiritual childhood, which is centered on trusting God in the small, ordinary moments of life. In her letters and writings, she often spoke of how she experienced God's love not through grand gestures, but in the quiet moments of prayer. She wrote, "For me, prayer is a movement of love. It is listening to God, and it is from the heart that I pray." Through her life, Saint Therese teaches us that prayer is not about impressing others or even about what we ask for. It is about offering our hearts in surrender and trusting that God will respond. The prayer of the heart is the prayer of the child, simple, honest, and full of trust. We are not called to complicate prayer, but to open ourselves to the love and presence of God. How often do we get distracted by the need to make our prayers sound perfect or profound? Yet God's heart is drawn to the simplicity of a surrendered soul. In secret prayer, we learn to listen as much as we speak. In Psalm 46:10, God says, "Be still and know that I am God." This stillness is the key to hearing God's voice in the depths of our hearts. It is in the silence that he speaks to us, not in the clamor of words, but in the quiet, gentle whispers of his Spirit. When we truly listen, we hear not only God's guidance, but his love, his peace, and his call to deeper intimacy. Saint Benedict, the founder of the Benedictine order, often spoke of the importance of silence and listening in prayer. He believed that through silence, the soul could be more receptive to God's voice. Benedictine monastic life is centered around the practice of ora e labora, prayer and work, where both are seen as a means of drawing closer to God. For the monks, prayer was not simply a matter of words, but of cultivating a deep listening and attentiveness to God's presence in every moment.
By training themselves in silence, they were better able to hear the whispers of God's Spirit in the midst of their daily tasks. The act of listening in prayer is an important spiritual discipline. It is easy to become caught up in the desire to speak, to pour out our concerns, our fears, our hopes. But true prayer requires not only speaking to God, but also sitting in his presence and waiting for him to speak to us. How often do we rush through our prayers, eager to finish, rather than resting in the presence of God and allowing his Spirit to minister to us? Prayer is not a transaction, it is a relationship. Just as in any relationship, communication is a two-way street. In prayer, we speak to God and we also listen. We bring our hearts to him and we wait for his heart to respond. Perhaps the most powerful prayer of listening in the Bible is the prayer of Samuel in 1 Samuel 3:10. Samuel was a young boy serving in the temple, and when God called his name in the night,
Samuel responded with the words, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Samuel's prayer was simple, a willingness to hear and to obey. It was a prayer of complete surrender to God's will, a prayer that said, "I am here, ready to listen, ready to be used." And in that moment, God revealed himself to Samuel in a way that would shape the course of Israel's history. In our own lives, we may not hear God speak in the dramatic way that Samuel did, but he speaks to us nonetheless, in the stillness of our hearts, in the quiet whispers of the Spirit, in the circumstances of our daily lives. The question is, are we listening? Are we creating space in our lives to hear God, to receive His guidance, and to be transformed by His presence? As you reflect on the practice of secret prayer, I encourage you to consider the following. How often do you simply sit in silence before God, listening for His voice? Do you find it difficult to quiet your mind and heart enough to hear Him? This is a challenge for many of us, especially in a world that is constantly pulling us in every direction. But the more we practice stillness in prayer, the more we learn to hear God's voice. It is in the secret place, in the silence, that we find true peace, true rest, and the strength to face the challenges of life with faith and hope. As you continue to cultivate this life of secret prayer, may you be open to hearing God's voice. May you learn to listen with your heart, not just your mind. And may you find in the secret place the peace and presence of God that surpasses all understanding. As we reflect on the power of secret prayers and the profound transformation they bring, it becomes clear that the culmination of such practices is not in the outward signs of success or visible rewards. Instead, the true reward lies in the peace of knowing that we are deeply aligned with God's will.
The life of prayer, particularly secret prayer, is not a means to obtain what we want from God, but rather a path to finding His will for us and, in that discovery, to experience His peace. Saint Francis of Assisi, one of the most beloved saints in Christian history, is a powerful example of a life transformed by prayer. His whole life was a prayer, lived in humble service to God and His creation. Francis's spirituality was centered around deep communion with God, and he often retreated to secluded places to pray and listen to God's voice. It was in those quiet, hidden moments that he came to know God's heart, and in doing so, was able to reflect that heart in his actions. One of his most famous prayers, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace," is a powerful reminder that true peace comes not from worldly success, but from surrendering ourselves to God's will. Francis's life teaches us that when we dedicate ourselves to secret prayer, we allow God's peace to transform us from within. This peace is not an escape from the trials and struggles of life, but a deep-seated trust that no matter what circumstances we face, God's presence will sustain us. In secret prayer, we acknowledge that we do not control the outcome, but that God's will is perfect, and He will guide us even in the midst of difficulty. Consider the prayer of Saint Francis. "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope." These words reflect a heart fully surrendered to God's will, a heart that desires to bring God's peace into the world, not through power or prestige, but through the quiet strength of prayer and humility. When we pray in secret, we are inviting this kind of transformation into our own lives. We are asking God to mold our hearts in such a way that we reflect His love and peace even in the most difficult situations. But how do we pray for this peace? How do we position ourselves to receive it?
One simple and powerful prayer is, "Father, I surrender all to you. Fill me with your peace that surpasses all understanding. Transform my heart so that I may reflect your love and grace to others." In this prayer, we ask God not only for peace, but for the grace to become instruments of peace in the world around us. It is a prayer of surrender, letting go of our need to control, and instead trusting that God will equip us to handle whatever comes our way with His peace. The Bible speaks often of the peace that comes from surrendering to God. In Philippians 4:6-7, Paul writes, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This peace, which transcends all understanding, is the fruit of secret prayer.
It is the reward for those who, like St. Francis, dedicate themselves to God in humble prayer and service. This peace is not dependent on our circumstances, but on our connection to God through prayer. This does not mean that life will always be easy, nor that our struggles will disappear. Rather, it means that in the midst of our difficulties, we can find a peace that is not of this world, a peace that can only come from God. In the secret place of prayer, we receive the strength and grace to face the challenges before us with courage and trust. How often do we long for peace, only to seek it in the wrong places? We search for it in success, in relationships, or in the approval of others. Yet the peace we seek is found not in these things, but in the quiet surrender of prayer. It is found in letting go of our own agendas and resting in the assurance that God's plan is perfect, even when we cannot see the way forward. In secret prayer, we open ourselves to receive this peace, knowing that God will meet us there in the quiet places of our hearts. As we continue in this journey of secret prayer, let us not forget the powerful example of St. Francis and the countless other saints who have gone before us. They remind us that the secret to peace is not found in external accomplishments, but in the quiet surrender of our hearts to God. They teach us that the true reward of prayer is not what we gain for ourselves, but what we are able to give to the world through God's peace. I encourage you to continue seeking this peace through secret prayer. May you find the strength to surrender all to God, and may His peace guard your heart and mind, transforming you into an instrument of His love and grace in the world. In the quiet moments of prayer, may you experience the presence of God in ways that fill you with the peace that only He can give. And as you surrender to His will, may you discover the true reward of prayer, a heart that is fully aligned with God's love and a life that reflects His peace to all around you.